Assalamu alaikum, students. So this is a video recording of my lectures on the limbic system. I'll be using the Zoom software to conduct this activity. And so here we go. So basically, this is a chapter heading in Guyton Physiology, the textbook, the limbic system, the hypothalamus, which is central to the limbic system as we'll be studying this. And the two main things, behavior and motivation, and the mechanisms behind it in the brain. This is a little picture which you'll appreciate. It's kind of self-explanatory and has to do with both the words, motivation and behavior. We'll be coming back to this picture later. So the learning objectives are straightforward. This is a shorter chapter in Guyton. We'll be dealing with, well, initially a lot of anatomy of the limbic system, and then we'll zoom in on the functions of the same. Now, I understand that you have not done a neuroanatomy at the moment. This is, I'm addressing the students of my college. So I understand you are to start neuroanatomy probably in July. So it's always challenging to discuss physiology, which deals with function, before the structure. And that's why in all standard textbooks of physiology, you get a functional anatomy. That's the word, functional anatomy, before we delve into the functional aspects of it. So we have to go through the functional anatomy in very little detail, not exactly the 3D uh, detail with relations and all that sort of thing that you will study in anatomy, but you'll get, hopefully you'll get an idea of where, what is structure wise, and then we'll be talking about function and so on and so forth. So a bit of some general comments on the limbic system. It comprises a large area of the forebrain in the center of it, and as you can see, the emotions are generated here. Uh, and emotions are backed up by motivations, as we'll soon talk about. From the clinical aspect, later on in your training, you'll be looking at psychological and psychiatric disorders, and here you have some detail, some mention of these disorders: bipolar disorder, depression, schizophrenia, and so on and so forth. Right. So there you have it. The caption on this picture is sometimes you look for motivation, and other times motivation, which happens to be Mr. Bear here, it finds you. So sometimes you're looking for motivation, and sometimes motivation finds you. You can imagine the emotion right now in this cyclist, and that obviously is being followed by a seemingly playful, but certainly the motivation of the bear is very clear here. So this person must be feeling anxious, he must be freaking out. There must be a lot of fear. All of these are emotions, and that is translating into a motivation of really kicking the bike in so that he gets away from the bear. Before we go on to the structure, I would like to comment on certain terminology that will pop up, especially when you read the chapter through. Motivation, very simply put, as in we use in English language, is any drive. What drives us? What motivates us? Why are you in medical school? Why do you do anything? That is motivation. In physiological terms, it's goal-directed behavior. So you want something, you are motivated to get that something, not that somebody has told you. You are self-motivated to learn, maybe, or to learn a skill, or these days, teenagers like a lot of video games. I see a lot of motivation to learn these new video games. So any goal-directed behavior is basically motivation. Uh, very briefly, there are two types of motivation, primary and secondary. And a very simple example is when the body goes into an imbalance between solute and solvent, i.e., there is deficiency of water uh, in relation to salt, you feel thirsty. That's an organic, an inbuilt organic need, which then motivates you primarily to go and seek water. This is that kind of very basic sort of example where an organic need motivates you to fetch something. Same goes for food and so on and so forth. When you feel cold, you want to take something warm on yourself. When you are uh, being drenched in rain, you would like to have a spot where you can dry yourself, so on and so forth. So these are uh, primary motivational behaviors. Secondary motivational behaviors. Let me just quickly go to the water example, where the water became disbalanced as compared to the salt of the body. Now, what kind of water would you like to have? That's secondary motivation. This is where your habit, your taste, the amount of money in your pocket will come in. So secondary factors, which will then address the motivation. So you may go for simple water out of a tap, um, uh, or the fancy amongst you will go for mineral water, sparkling water. The silly amongst you will go for a fizzy drink, knowing medically that it doesn't quench any thirst, it actually makes you even more thirsty. But then teenagers are teenagers. So, secondary motivational behavior has other factors which address this behavior. So that's motivation, the defined and two main types of motivation clarified. Another aspect of motivation is reward and punishment. You will be seeing this phrase a lot in Guyton and in other texts. There's a lot of talk about reward and punishment in behavior. Now, why is this so? Because uh, from a researcher point of view, or a doctor's point of view, or a scientist's point of view, how can you judge behavior in a person or in an organism? Say a rat, a lab rat. You're conducting experiment on behavior in a lab rat. You must have heard lab rat experiments. You know, the mouse which is trained to go and fetch cheese and not go to the electrode which gives it electric shock. Remember that? That kind of reward and punishment experiments. Now, why are they like this? Because when we talk about motivation and emotion, we want some sort of a thing which we can measure. That's the problem, or that's the limitation of science. We we are into measurable stuff. An internal emotion, quote unquote, cannot be measured, but an external, i.e., a response to a certain emotion. So if somebody is sad, and the person has a typical sad face or is crying, that's a response to an emotion. So reward and punishment, by giving a reward to the rat, going to the right example, or punishing the rat. Reward is the cheese, punishment is the small electrocution that it experiences. Uh, but by that, we can study behavior, motivational behavior very clearly. So that's why you will hear a lot of stuff regarding reward and punishment. Then you'll be reading a lot about hypothalamus. What is hypothalamus? Hypothalamus is a structure in the brain which is like the central hero of this limbic system. Uh, the main is the main. It's the main place where where the main stuff happens when you talk about motivations and emotions and behaviors. So you'll be studying a lot about the hypothalamus. Indeed, the hypothalamus has all sorts of regulatory centers which govern eating, drinking, temperature control, sexual behavior, and so on and so forth. An interesting example is in the lateral part of the hypothalamus. If you if they basically ran experiments in mice and they stimulated electrically stimulated the lateral parts of their thalamus. Now their brain is minuscule, but it has many, if not all, components like our brain. So again, they basically stimulated the lateral parts of uh, the mice's brain, of the hypothalamus, that is, and it evoked a pleasurable and enjoyable, apparently, response from the mouse, in the sense that when that particular electrode got stimulated by the researcher, the mouse seemed to enjoy it. So what they did is they hooked it up with a pedal, which the mouse can itself press. So guess what? The mouse started to repeatedly press that pedal, right? Because it was enjoying what was happening in return. So much so that it pressed that pedal of that reward area 2,000 times in an hour, to the point that it got exhausted. So that's motivation for you. A general point about motivation also is related to learning. Learning is very, very motivational, quote unquote. You are motivated to learn things which you like, and things that you do not like, it's a drag. You don't feel motivated. You don't really learn a lot of the things that you don't like. So motivation and learning go hand to hand. And in that, in learning, the limbic system is not alone. The limbic system is joined by cerebral cortex, brainstem, and even spinal cord. Okay, so that's that. Some more terminology. Emotion. First, I'll tell you the boring book uh, definition of an emotion. It can be considered in terms of a relationship between an individual and an environment, based on the individual's evaluation of the environment, disposition towards the environment, and the actual response to it. Are you awake, or are you all sleeping? Well, if I were you, after hearing this long, bookish, boring definition, I'd be sleeping. But let me put some things into context here. So he's mentioned individuals' evaluation of the environment. So one is evaluation. What is evaluation? So for example, the examination hall. You've been there, you've not enjoyed it, you don't like to be there, and um, your response to it is, well, it shows on your grades. Okay. So an individual evaluation of the environment, i.e., in the examination hall, hostile. Yes. Disposition towards the environment, dislike, fear, disgust, don't want to be here. Am I getting there? Of course I am. I am your invigilator, remember? Or used to be in the pre-COVID-19 world. And lastly, your response to it. Well, the response is your grades. How well you negotiated in that quote unquote hostile environment which you didn't like. Did you get good grades? Or did you manage to conduct yourself in a way which was fruitful eventually? That, as compared to your nice little cozy room with your television, with your pizzas and your fizzy drinks, you can solve the 3 points on this scenario as well. It's totally different. So that's emotion for you. Emotions are generated in our brain, basically in the limbic system. Emotions are old emotions, which have passed in our previous lives, current emotions, and these emotions have a huge implication on the way we behave and respond to different situations. So that's that. Number two, you'll be hearing about rhythms and cycles. So I'll just clarify here. Uh, Rhythms basically are daily things. So if there is a change in anything, like temperature going up and down, during a day, that's a rhythm, while a cycle is more of a monthly thing, or it spreads out over many days. So the famous monthly example is of the menstrual cycle. So stuff like that, which really spreads out over many weeks, is a cycle. And rhythms are something which you undergo on a daily basis. We'll be discussing rhythms and cycles under hypothalamus. Then we'll talk about this term, sexual dimorphism. So very briefly, it's a very big topic. There is a part of the hypothalamus called the SDN, sexual dimorphic nucleus, uh, that basically develops as quote unquote male or quote unquote female when you are a fetus. So males and females are different in size and shape of the body. And this basically stems out of that part of the hypothalamus from when you are still a fetus. Okay, so now we are starting the limbic system. You can see that anatomy needs to precede the function, and then there will be some juicy integrated examples that we'll discuss. Okay. Okay, so after that short break, let's dive in. We were discussing the limbic system. So, right. So this is basically an overview. I don't intend to go into details of what is what here. I just want you to have an appreciation of this blue structure. You can see it is more circular than linear. You see a lot of round stuff, loopy stuff, and then some swellings, some swollen stuff. Look at this swollen tube here. Seems to be called the hippocampus. Then you have this snail-like thing, that little swelling on top of the hippocampus. And it says that it's the amygdala. And well, this is some place famous, the thalamus. And here, very deep, tucked away, and almost insignificant. Here, this is the hypothalamus. Anyhow, so you see that this blue thing is basically the limbic system. Now so just to give you an idea of where it is, how does it look like, and now we'll talk about its details. So this scary looking diagram is basically from Guyton. And it talks about the underlying, the things that have been underlined basically are part of the limbic system. Let me come back to this, or maybe just have a quick uh, appreciation of what the blue stuff, remember the blue stuff that we saw in the last slide? This is that loopy thing. Remember the amygdala? You can see that it's called amygdaloid body. It's the same thing, really. You know, the big swollen tube called the hippocampus. It is right here. Okay. And then the round tube like thing, one is here and the other is here. Okay. So you can read the text about this and some details, anatomical details. This is a much more physiological, user-friendly diagram. Here you see the various components. This whole thing is basically the limbic system. It starts off from the orbitofrontal cortex, the subcallosal gyrus, the big U type thing on top that you see here. This is the cingulate gyrus, okay? And then you have the subcallosal gyrus, right? Orbitofrontal cortex is right here. So it starts from here, loops back, and then comes back in. So this is how, just follow the cursor. It comes here, goes back, then swings back in. Okay, here we go. Orbital frontal cortex, subcallosal gyrus, cingulate gyrus. It goes back, loops back again, and it's tucked under hippocampus and amygdala, the parahippocampal gyrus. Let's go back, see it again. You have the hippocampus here, the amygdala here. This is the hippocampus, this is the amygdala, and this the swelled up tube-like thing here is the hippocampal gyrus, right? So it's tucked underneath the hippocampus, just like here. Hippocampus, amygdala. It's schematic, of course. It's not real, it's schematic. The real thing is the previous slide. So hypothalamus sits nicely in the center. Guyton correctly has made it prominent. It sits in the center, surrounded by the rest of the limbic system components. Basal ganglia, some parts of the anterior nuclei of the thalamus, septal area, para-olfactory area, and so on. Let me just focus you on the hypothalamus in this example. So you see this bold thing is the hypothalamus. Well, we just follow it right here. This is where the hypothalamus is. This is how small it is. But as you will see today, after a lot of pain and sweat, that hypothalamus is a very, very busy area, and it really cannot happen without hypothalamus. What cannot happen? Homeostasis. You can't function normally. Not your brain, not your body. There are lots of body functions which are heavily dependent on hypothalamus. That there's a lot of behavioral functions which are dependent on hypothalamus. So this is where it is. This is where in the center of it all sits the hypothalamus. This is just another depiction of this diagram. More real, but it's really the same thing. Okay, so this is a magnified view. I really like it, this diagram. This is basically, there are many nuclei, as I'll show you in the following slides, of the hypothalamus. This is the hypothalamus. The important point about this diagram is, since hypothalamus has a lot of vegetative and behavioral functions, as I just mentioned, it sits very strategically and very sensibly. It makes a lot of sense in close proximity to the master gland of the body, the pituitary gland. So you see blood flow coming and very conveniently passing near the very key nuclei of the hypothalamus, and then going on their business to the anterior lobe, where all sorts of hormones are formed in the anterior pituitary, as you would remember. This is the posterior lobe. And this diagram is very nice because it just shows you the anatomical proximity of the hypophyseal vessels on this side, and the hypothalamophyseal tract on the posterior pituitary side, and its physical proximity to the various nuclei of the hypothalamus. Okay, so before we go to the functions, let me take a short break here.